Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, an island show where we strive to bring you issues and interviews that are local, national, international sometimes. And, it's always great to talk about things that people are talking about while they sit around having a cup of coffee or a beer or whatever their favorite beverage is. And speaking of beverages, my co-host with the most, John Drisick, has just finished his and is here now to talk about all sorts of things with me, including the outfall from the removal of Advanced Education Minister Selena Robinson by the NDP.
Ultimately, in my opinion, a tragic affair. When we first hear the BC Advanced Education Minister was getting the boot, from remarks she made that suggested that Jewish arrivals took crappy land and created a bountiful Israel, we wondered about the blowback. The pro-Palestinian movement in BC hates Israel and demanded that this Jewish minister be immediately removed. So David Eby quickly pulled the rug. And you really have to wonder how this news has been received by your average NDP voter. Robinson was loyal to the party and given absolutely no benefit of the doubt.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of internal polling doubtless taking place right now behind closed doors at NDP headquarters to make sure they haven't sprung a serious leak of support. After all, this is an election year. And so how much has the ground shifted since December? That's when the last Abacus poll was published. Let's take again a look at that Abacus survey, which shows the NDP well in the lead at 44%, -4, but David Eby still in a very comfortable position.
Yeah.
BC Conservatives, the upstart BC Conservatives, up 24 points to 26 points under John Rustad. BC United, the former BC Liberals, have been languishing, down 17, and they're at 17% support, at least they were in December. Have things improved? Is Kevin Falcon gaining back support as we speak? And then there's the BC Green Party. They lost 6 points at 9%, and now we hear their leader, Sonia Furstenau, is moving her riding. She's going to run in Victoria Beacon Hill, which is going to be tough. It's been a very strong NDP seat. So you really wonder how the terrain is shifting. Does David Eby look at this next election as an easy cakewalk, or is it going to be a difficult challenge? And it's really interesting to ponder this. And you look now at the list of high-profile former BC Liberal cabinet ministers that are ready to leave and move on to federal politics and run for the federal Tories and Pierre Poilievre. And that's rather than hanging around with Kevin Falcon and BC United. And it's just maybe a marker of what's going on in the province.
Fascinating times. Hey, look at what you've just described. And we're not even really into the meat of this election this year. Holy mackerel. Who knows what's going to happen? So glad we have the Rumble Room to talk about this. There certainly seems to be a crack on the right side of the political spectrum, which is clear when you listed those names. Ellis Ross, former Haisla chief, cabinet minister, energy critic for BC United. He's going to run for the Conservatives. Great pickup for the Tories. We also hear about getting ready to leave. 30-year career as a Metzke Abbotsford MLA, Mike de Jong, once BC's finance minister. I remember him with the old school Liberals back in the Campbell days. Also Ian Black, a BC Liberal cabinet minister who went on to head the Vancouver Board of Trade. Some very strong, powerful members are going to Ottawa. What does this mean to Kevin Falcon and the BC United?
There's still time. There's still time. The election isn't tomorrow, but Kevin Falcon has his work cut out for him. And he's had that since he became the leader of this party. So many adjustments, including their name change, which I still don't think has really settled in the electorate's mind. Also losing MLA John Rustad. And he walked and started his own BC Conservative Party as a maverick action. It's taken hold. It's split a lot of support in some of the ridings that have always supported the BC Liberals and now BC United, but they are starting to track as supporters of this Conservative Party. And maybe it's because the BC Conservative Party in many people's minds is linked to the federal Conservatives. They are separate parties, not the same agenda necessarily, but people like that handle Conservative. So what does this all mean for David Eby? Does he still have a win ahead? We keep asking that. Well, the election is, as I've mentioned, a long ways off, but former MLA Sheila Orr certainly has strong views about how things are going to end on the finish line.
They can win with their standard vote, which is 33.33% or something. I don't know what it is, but they get that period. I mean, they could put a mop with a head on and they'd win that vote. However, they don't have to worry because the BC Conservatives already have, I think, now 30 candidates ready to start running. I've read some of their bios and I have to tell you, they're really quite good. I mean, Rustad is a very sound political analyst. He's got really good people running for him. So he runs those people. He only has to win 5, 6, 7 seats. And then the Liberals, I'm sure, will lose a couple because things are not so good for them right now. And there would never, I doubt there'll ever be an alignment between Rustad and Falcons. I would be shocked if there was. I don't think there will. And so I think the NDP don't have to do an awful lot. You're right. They're staying very calm and close down. They are doing some terrible things, actually. I have to say, I mean, I watch it. Most people on the street don't, but I do. And it's like, oh, how can you do that? But they're doing it. And I think that they have no problem winning next time.
We're hoping to have Kevin Falcon in the Rumble Room soon to talk about his rebuild, MLA recruitments, and finding holes in the NDP's game plan, and likely the Conservatives' game plan. There's no question there are vulnerabilities on that side of the ledger. Here are the big 3 issues on the table. Number 1, housing affordability and the cost of living. Number 2, homelessness, crime, and the opioid crisis. And number 3, and these aren't ranked in any sort of order, they're all big, bad issues, the doctor shortage and poor access to medical care. These issues, along with a bunch of others, are right at the top of everyone's mindset. And we'll watch with fascination at who grabs the public's attention during this coming election with solutions, I hope. However, now we're going to move on to another major topic on today's program, Robin, our military and Canada's role in the world.
Absolutely, John. And you list those top priorities for BC. Similar priorities for our national discussion. We have an election coming up in a year's time, and we'll be deciding if Canada is still a middle power or if we become a middling power. And, we are involved, of course, in a lot of different things on the international front, and there's questions about our role, especially our military role in supporting countries across our borders and refugees and all the things that Canada tries to do and tries to exert influence in. And we've just had the Ukrainians announce they've let go of their top general. Ukraine is still in this tooth and nail battle with invading Russians, and there doesn't seem to be any end to that. There's this terrible conflict in the Gaza. Canadians would like to see this all stop, see negotiations begin, and we wonder how that is all going to come to an end. And so how do Canadians feel, I guess, about world affairs? And we just have a new poll by Angus Reid out that gives us some idea and opens some eyes about how people on the right, particularly, are feeling about all of this. According to the Angus Reid survey, 35% support of Ukraine as long as it takes. That's by all Canadians surveyed. 30%, however, are uncertain if we should continue the support. And 25% are now saying Canada is doing too much to assist Ukraine. And if you look at the Conservative numbers within that, it's much more stark, as we had a situation 2 years ago when the war broke out where overwhelmingly Conservatives said it was important that Canada's role be strong behind the Ukrainians and helping support them against the Russians. But this support has now fallen to 45%. So things are shifting, John.
So where do things stand in Ukraine, the Gaza, and at home? We hear concern that Canada's military capacity is falling. And this is concerning when it comes to national security and our role in NATO. and peacekeeping in a world that seems to be on fire. To learn more about where Canada stands militarily and perhaps get a read on these world conflicts, we again turn to a favorite guest of ours and president of the Victoria branch of the Canadian International Council, Lieutenant Colonel Chris Kilford. Let's zoom him in.
Do you think that this protesting that's going on all across Western Europe, United States, there was a big protest in New York blocking off major arteries into the city, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, these pro-Palestinian groups that are so loud and so incredibly angry. What long-term effect do you think that's going to have on public policy? Do you think governments have to bend to this, or does it actually build their resolve that they're going to ignore it and charge on? I mean, the silent majority maybe isn't moved as much as people are that are being directly affected if they can't make it across town because their streets blocked by protesters. What's your feeling about these protests? Do you think that they're actually productive or counterproductive?
A little bit of both. But at the end of the day, we live in a democracy, and people come out to show their anger. And I think governments that don't pay attention to this or try to ignore what a significant portion of the public are thinking. I think there are many people that would agree with what the protesters are saying. They may not like the tactics, but they certainly don't like to see people on their televisions or on their social media fields, young children, mums and dads with nowhere to go. People respond to that. This is a whole human security issue, and Canada's always stood up for this. Our whole responsibility to protect doctrine, which has lost a little bit of its cachet, but this is about human security, and people are dying, and we don't like to see it. We don't like to see it in Ukraine, and I think this is what this is what Canadians are. This is us. Many of us have come from conflict areas around the world where our families or the people that are arriving have come from these zones. They know what it's like to be bombed, and they understand intrinsically, and that's what drives them out onto the streets to say, we don't want to see this happening to anyone else. And so blocking roads and bridges and so forth, sometimes that's the only way people can get their messages across or have some impact, I guess. And it is a bit counterproductive, I would have to say. But I still think fundamentally it's important people do come out and people hear their voices, and the Canadian government hoists this aboard and see how we can help alleviate the situation. Now, is that bringing more people from Gaza here as refugees? Yeah, sure. I mean, this is something we should be looking at, pressing the Israeli government perhaps to allow more humanitarian aid in. Of course, that's true as well. But of course, then we have to respect the Israeli side and what they're going through. So it's a minefield. Even my commentating on this, people pay close attention to what anybody ever says on this sort of this particular situation, because it is an absolute minefield where people are so angry, and you see it on the Canadian street. But I would just say, our government needs to be aware of how the Canadian public is feeling over this whole issue, not just the Palestinian protesters, they are incredibly important, but how Canadians feel about their support to Israel, which is also an important. We have supported Israel from the very moment it came together. Our country, we shipped surplus weapons from the Second World War to the Israeli government when they were first coming together. It was seen to be very important at that time.
Dead a winter now in Ukraine, but the battle continues and lives are still being lost. Do you see any signs that we're getting closer to a resolution? It seems like neighboring countries are getting tired of this. And if support flounders, won't it be tough for Ukraine to match Russia's huge manpower advantage?
Yeah, so we are into the second winter. I am surprised at how much activity is occurring on the front lines, albeit not major, but there are counterattack or attacks and counterattacks and counter moves going on all along the front line by both sides. From what I can see, the Russians are losing a lot of equipment as the Ukrainians have become a little bit more defensive in nature. They're losing a lot of troops as they use them in their human wave tactics. But everybody seems to be in a bit of a stalemate right now. Hope that some miracle weapons will show up that will sway the effort, and the Ukrainians will have a bit of a breakthrough. Potential arrival of F-16s and Abrams tanks, which we know are in the vicinity. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure if anybody's going to achieve a massive breakthrough. I mean, look at the Russians themselves. So they're stuck on that 900-kilometer front line. I often wonder why, for example, they don't actually open up a new front to the northeast and have another attack at Kyiv, even if it's just a distraction. I mean, they haven't even been able to do that. So there must be some big issues on their side of the house preventing them from engaging in major operations, even though they seem to be combing every street and corner in Russia for recruits to send to the front line. I think that's actually a big weak point for them, too. We know that those young men and not so young men are showing up on the Russian side with little in the way of equipment, little in the way of training, and they're dying in large numbers. People back home, this is becoming a bigger and bigger problem for the Russian government. You cannot keep a lid on the number of dead bodies coming back. It affects so many people, so many families. And so Putin might be able to soldier on, win the election coming up soon, and put a brave face on things. But I would imagine that there's great concern within Russia, in the Kremlin, as to how things are actually going to play out. Let me give you one example. We know a huge sum is going to be dedicated to the defense budget in this year. It's grown by leaps and bounds. It's more than they're going to spend on healthcare, more than they're going to spend on education. So the actual social fabric of the country is going to get pulled apart as they throw more and more resources into this war. They're heading into a war economy. As for the rest of us in the West, I mean, it's tough on Ukraine, but as far as we're concerned here in Canada, the United States, Great Britain, France, wherever you want to go, life goes on. We're sending billions of dollars, lots of weapons, but for us, it's not a life and death struggle for us in the West. It is for the Ukrainians, and they're getting tons of our support, but it's also a big problem for Russia. They are in dire straits.
Over the last couple months, we've heard two vice admirals and the general chief of defense staff suggest that the armed forces are understaffed and our resources are overstretched. There's real concern that Canada isn't able to meet its operational targets. At the same time, we keep making commitments to Ukraine and NATO operations. Is Canada trying to do too much with limited resources?
Oh, well, thanks for that, John. And there's a lot of questions in there. And I think, no, I mean, it's really good. I think, first of all, it's always surprising when senior officers do come out and make public statements, or as in the case of the Navy, the video that describes some of the challenges the Navy is facing. It's very bold to do this, but I guess it points to the level of, for a lack of a better word, desperation that they are feeling in Ottawa, in the department, in the Canadian Armed Forces, as to the situation they find themselves in. There's a lack of personnel. That's absolutely true. Unfortunately, though, it's not a new phenomenon. We've always struggled. And it's always against an endless number of missions that seem to drop into the lap of the Canadian Armed Forces. And sadly, I think they pull it off. They seem to be able to do everything that's required of them. And I say sadly because there are points when I wish that the military would just turn around and say, we're not doing that, or we can't do it. I mean, they can't technically refuse to do something, but we can't do it. But we're so good, and I served for 36 years in the military. We are so good at meeting all of the requirements with few people sometimes. And the government goes, well, we've heard you say this before. You've always helped us out. You've always been there. So there is some light on the horizon, but at the moment, I would say we need to address the recruitment and retention issue with the military. It can't be kicked down the road again and again.
So lots of food for thought, and we're always very grateful to Chris Kilford for his insights on world affairs and our military. We have so many military families, ex-military, people who are related or work with the military on Vancouver Island and in British Columbia. So there's a lot of interest in this particular matter, as all Canadians should be interested in how we're spending our dollars and how Canada is being perceived and acting in the world today. And on that note, John, I think it's pretty well time to wrap up the show.
Absolutely, Robin. So much material to think about, to chat about, to review, to comment, as we again try to deliver the kind of information and interviewers that our viewers want to hear. That's what we think. We really appreciate the support of our audience. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for following us and sending your feedback. To regularly review and listen sometimes to the Victoria Rumble Room, there are many ways you can do that. Facebook, there is X, formerly known as Twitter, there is YouTube, there's a podcast that you can just listen to, there is Instagram, and there is TikTok. That's it for me. I remain your creation sensation, John Jurisic.
And Johnny, you're always sensational, and so are our many viewers, which we really appreciate. I'm Robin Adair, and rumble on.